Hello. Well, I'm going to start by drawing a couple of things together. Let's start with the police marching a mass of hungry, irritable Muslims in the middle of Ramadan, straight towards a Tommy Robinson rally in a working class suburb of Oldham. Oh, by the way, I'm going to put up some of the video there, and you'll see that one of the men, the man who's selfieing the march, by the way, he puts up his finger like that, which is a bad sign. Anyway, that's another matter for another video. The question is, why did the police direct this group, escort them towards that working class suburb and the Tommy Robinson rally? There's only one reason for them to do that. They wanted to precipitate a fight. They might try to explain it by saying that the Muslim gangs would head into that estate anyway, but come on, they could have just as easily blocked off the road, couldn't they? But they didn't. They actually brought the Muslims straight to the rally, which was, by the way, full of families, as well as being held in a place where there were families living. It's obvious. So that's the first police situation I wanted to draw to your attention. Now there's the next. Sargon posted a very emotional video in which he describes how the Gordon Brown government, that is a Labour government, Labour being the party that's supposed to safeguard the interests of the working classes, by the way, the Gordon Brown government told the police specifically not to investigate the stories that were starting to bubble up about predatory gangs of Muslim men imprisoning and raping pre-teen girls, mostly, again, from the working classes. And if they were called out, if the police were called out to an incident they couldn't ignore, then they were instructed to bury the case and not to prosecute the men. And the police complied with those instructions, so far as I can tell, with a great deal of enthusiasm, although they sometimes did arrest the raped girls for lewd behaviour or bad manners or something, or they arrested their fathers if their fathers were so foolish as to try to rescue their daughters. I haven't heard of one police supremo making a fuss about that political decision. Not one of them. Not one was prepared to rock the boat and risk the pension or the knighthood. Now, in both those cases, it appears that the ruling classes and their servants, the upholders of the law, just hate the lower orders and are doing their best to keep them suppressed. But actually, it's not as simple as that, because this isn't the first time in modern history that a beleaguered group has tried to establish its needs in the public imagination, and it's not the first time that the ruling elite and the media have done what they could to suppress or vilify the prime movers. So this is an example of a situation where they come for somebody whom you don't like very much, so you don't do anything, and then the next on the list is you. But by that time you're on your own. The first time in modern times that there's been a mass movement of people who found the government suddenly turning against them for purely political reasons was in the countryside marches of 2002 and 2004. After the Labour government, just because of socialist zealotry, decided to stop people hunting. The media colluded in the image that all countryside people who hunted were a bunch of chinless aristocrats careening about the landscape on expensive horses. And the fact that ordinary middle-class people from the suburbs, like me for instance, or young women who work double shifts in the supermarket to pay for their horses' fodder, or even people who look after the hounds or shoe the horses or supply the fodder, all participating in the hunting structure, that didn't seem to occur to anyone in the media. Or when the BBC had a field day, so to speak, at poking fun at the toffs. And the Labour Party didn't seem to care how many of its constituents would be put out of work. So most of the country was not that bothered about the fuss over the hunting ban. Now, I remember, I think it must have been the second countryside march. When I first started out on the march, I thought it looked very much like the police were trying to start some sort of unrest. I put the thought out of my mind because at the time it just felt too ridiculous, but they were doing something which I later learned was called kettling. That is, they were using barriers to funnel us into ever more and more densely packed crowds, which in a less disciplined lot would definitely have started some sort of kickback. I've got a picture and I'll put it up here, and you can see how the people are all packed together and how there's that big wide empty road next to them, but they're being kept in by barriers. At one point I happened to witness a really nasty incident. The single group that we were was divided into two. The barrier at one point sort of met in a V, and we were put into two streams on either side of the road with a widening gap between them. And a red-haired young woman just in front of me suddenly started shouting and waving at the other side of the road. And there was a group waving back at her. Obviously, she got separated from her friends and was attracting their attention. She then, evidently without thinking too much about it, and assuming the police were her friends, of course, vaulted the barrier and started running to the other side of the road. It was only a few steps to get to her friends. It was quite obvious that is all she was doing. But that was when a policeman came racing up that centre open space, bellowing something like, "Get back!" And he then threw himself at the girl and rugby tackled her to the ground. As she fell to the ground with some force, he then got up and grabbed her arms, behind her, and dragged her off very violently. I found a picture from another incident of a similar type, and I'll put that up here. It turns out it was happening all over, but at that moment, everyone in the crowd immediately around me who saw that nasty little display suddenly realised that the police were actually trying to provoke a reaction. They didn't, only because hunting types are usually law-abiding citizens who already know about group responsibility, but it was an awful situation and an education. So it's not just a matter of the ruling elites and the media and the police hating just the working classes. They're putting into practice tactics they had already rehearsed with the countryside marchers. You see, and this was the point. The Countryside Alliance is comprised of people from all walks of life. When we got to the end of that march and listened to the speeches, there were speakers from the House of Lords and from parties in the House of Commons and from big businesses and from little shops. And although we'd all come together on one issue, we were not a voting bloc. When the people got home, we'd all be voting the way we'd always voted. The Conservatives would still vote Conservative, the Socialists would still vote Labour, and the Liberal Democrats would still vote Lib Dem. The government, whatever it was, didn't have anything to worry about. They'd still hang on to power, whatever. We weren't a bloc. On the other hand, Muslims, they're a bloc. And that's the big difference. So, although it looks like a succession of governments who have a contempt for various groups of people are just exercising that contempt, it isn't that at all. It's a contempt for people who don't vote, or whose vote is taken for granted, like the working class vote is assumed to be Labour, when the working classes bother to vote at all, which I can tell you they don't in any significant numbers. That's a big problem. Now, the votes for the European elections aren't in as I'm making this video, but I'm assuming that the Brexit Party has made big gains, and possibly UKIP, and I hope Tommy Robinson. But you know what? It's not going to make that much of a difference, because that's the EU. It's not the government of this country. And the only way we'll get any real change is when people put the same energy into a parliamentary vote that they're putting into the EU elections. Without that, the same old will just repeat itself in never-ending circles. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and if you wish to donate, click the subscribe star link where you can make a one-off payment or set up a regular contribution, or I have a PayPal account at grannyopteryx@gmail.com. Till next time.